with Rob Snow continues
on News Radio.
There is a new report from Food Banks Canada, and it says visits to food banks in this country are at an all-time high. Kirsten Beardsley is the CEO of Food Banks Canada. Thanks again for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Tell us again about your latest report.
Yeah, so our Food Banks Canada's 2024 Hunger Count report shows that we've reached over 2 million visits to food banks in a single month of this year, and that food bank visits have nearly doubled in 5 years.
And what are the reasons behind that?
Well, we're really seeing it's this ongoing problem of a decline of our social safety net, meeting the high costs that all of us are experiencing. And really, we're seeing the high costs related to housing and to food in particular, making it so that folks don't have enough at the end of the month and are having to turn to the food banks. And many are going for the first time, so we're still seeing a number of new clients coming to food banks who've never had to before.
Okay, so let's expand on that a little bit. How has the makeup of the clientele of food banks changed over time?
Yeah, it's hard to share the news about kids always, but we're seeing a growing number of kids in Canada having to use food banks, or their families having to use food banks to make sure they have food. So out of that 200 million visits in March, 700,000 were for kids. And so, those are kids who should be going to school and playing and not worrying about where their next meal is coming from. So that's a hard statistic. What we're also seeing is that a growing number of folks are employed. So about 20% of people who use food banks have jobs and are still not making enough given the costs that they are faced with to not have to use the food bank. So that's a growing portion. And we're also seeing a growing number of newcomers coming through the doors. So but it's not really one type of person. It's people like you and me in communities right across Canada.
And what is this doing to food banks? What impact is it having on food banks and their ability to conduct operations? The demand?
Well, it's a really stressful time right now. I've never seen it like this. Food banking isn't easy work, in the good times. But what we're seeing right now is that 30% of food banks have reported that they've run out of food before meeting the demand. Over 50% of food banks have had to adjust their service so that you can't come as often as you used to, perhaps, or you're getting a little bit less food, so that they are adjusting to meet the demand. I mean, food banks in Canada weren't built for this level of service. We aren't structured to respond to an ever-increasing amount of need, and right now we're on the brink. I am frightened for what's to come. If we don't see these numbers come down, food banks will certainly meet their capacity to serve who needs us.
Okay, what's happening with both financial donations to food banks and food donations to food banks?
Well, we are grateful that from coast to coast to coast, Canadians step up when we need them. So we are seeing that food banks are, we're always well supported. But as I said, when you've got 30% of food banks in our network having to, running out of food before the need is met, it does mean that many people in communities are not in a position to give as they once were. Their budgets are stretched. What we really need to see is a declining number of clients come through the door so that we are adequately able to meet the demand. So we need government action and policies that will mean fewer people rely on food banks every month in Canada.
Okay. What does government action look like?
Well, we're really focused on what drives people to food banks. So we're looking at government policy in 4 different areas. One is really fixing this broken social safety net that hasn't been invested in a long time. And there we're really looking at a groceries and essentials benefit. So while governments enact longer-term policy, we need them to understand that folks are struggling today and they need money in their pockets today. So that's one example. We're also looking at investments in affordable housing, support for low-income workers, and being Canada, we also are calling on governments to make sure they pay attention to the needs of the Arctic and the far north, where food insecurity is at extreme levels.
Okay, so when you talk about the social safety net, What are the shortcomings there with the social safety net in Canada?
Well, right now what we've got is about 40% of the people who use food banks have provincial social assistance as their main source of income. And when you look at the rates, they're not adequate anywhere in the country. So many clients to food banks on social assistance are spending 80, 90, sometimes over 100% of their income on housing, and then have to scramble together community supports to fulfill the rest of that. So it's not an adequate system that allows anyone an adequate standard of living. We've seen, thankfully, the government introduced the Canada Disability Benefit. This is another example at the federal level. And we're hoping that they expand the benefit and make it even more accessible, more folks be eligible, and have it be worth more so that folks who are on disabilities, who have limited ability to be able to work, aren't forced to live in poverty because the supports available to them are simply inadequate.
Yeah, I mean, for example, I was looking up some social assistance rates today for various provinces, and just by way of benchmark, for single individuals, I mean, it's between $700 and $800 a month.
Yeah, and that's
social assistance where you can't live on that, right?
You can't. I mean, it's completely eaten up in most parts of the country. That is more than what you would pay on housing, and right. It doesn't. Then there's no way to figure out your life around that. You're constantly focused on how you're going to get your essentials. Right? If you've got a roof over your head, how are you going to keep it? If you can keep a roof, how are you going to get food every single day? It is not something that I think we should be proud of as Canadians, that this is the social safety net we've got in place for folks who are struggling to make ends meet.
Okay. So a groceries and essentials benefit, what does that look like?
Well, it's using the current GST credit, which is a tool that the government has in place. It's targeted at low-income folks, and the federal government's used it. They've added a payment, so it usually comes up 4 times a year. They've added a 5th payment a few times during COVID, and as inflation has stretched Canadians' budgets. So it's a tool that already exists, but what we're calling on governments to do is recognize that people need that money to pay for essentials every month, so turn it into a monthly benefit, increase it so that low-income folks aren't having to stop at the food bank, aren't having to struggle to make ends meet and have their essentials paid for.
Okay. So food bank usage is at a record high after reaching a record high last year. Do you expect any kind of relief from this demand?
I have to remain hopeful, or the work wouldn't be possible. But I have to say it's starting, it is frustrating that governments aren't hearing our calls, our alarm bells that we're raising. And this year I have to come and say the system won't be able to continue this way indefinitely. And we need governments to take action. And we know that what leads governments to take action is all of us. If we make this an issue during elections, if we make this an issue for all of the elected officials we come in contact with, then they will have to respond. And I think that that's where my energy is going now. It doesn't appear governments are listening, but I know Canadians don't like these numbers. I know this isn't the image of the vision of Canada that we all have. We shouldn't be sending kids to school hungry. We shouldn't have this number of people relying on food banks. So I hope everyone will join us in our movement to make change.
Okay. Thank you for your time. I wish you had better news. Okay.
Hopefully next time. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Kirsten Beardsley is the CEO of Food Banks Canada. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know. This is News Radio.
You have questions.
Now You Know with Rob Snow has the answers.
On News Radio.
Here alongside David Smith, who is back from a brief holiday. You were in British Columbia, David.
Yes.
Overseeing the election.
Well, I had to keep an eye on those recounts. Doing the recounts, I had to scrutinize things, make sure it's all up to snuff.
Yeah, no, isn't that something else, though, the BC election? No, you weren't out there. You were out there. You weren't fishing for votes or fishing for ballots. You were fishing for salmon.
Salmon, mostly coho salmon, running up from the river. From the ocean. I do that every fall, and it's just, gosh, it is such a unique experience to head up the rivers around the Sea to Sky Highway in British Columbia. If you've never made it out there, you really should. Just once, at least, before you die. It's incredible.
Okay. How was the fishing?
The fishing was really the trip of a lifetime.
Of a lifetime?
I may have ruined salmon fishing for myself from here on out because of how good it was. I just happened to arrive after an atmospheric river had dumped a bunch of water into these tributaries, and then the river levels were stabilizing and the water was getting clearer just as I happened to arrive. So long story short, in 3.5 days of fishing, I caught 42 salmon.
Wow. So what do you do with all that fish? You can't bring them home. What do you do with them? You throw them back?
Mostly catch and release fishing. You can keep,
catch and release. Okay.
You can keep one per person per day. So did keep one and froze it and brought some of it home in my carry-on, which I didn't know you were allowed to do, but you can.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. So look, we were off to a bit of a rocky start there. I apologize for that.
Yeah.
We had Pierre Poilievre on the line, and the thing is, my computer did some kind of software update this morning and decided it was going to reset all my audio settings on my computer, which is how I connect and do this radio show with you every day. And the engineer was working on it. We just ran short of time, and obviously we didn't get all the kinks worked out. So we do believe that we have everything worked out, and I believe Pierre Poilievre has been kind enough, and he's going to join us right after the news, and we will resume our conversation about housing and other things with the leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. And then we'll roll into our Newsday panel because there's a lot happening this week in federal politics. I'm Rob Snow. This is News Radio.
No question goes unasked or unanswered.
Now you know with Rob Snow returns on News Radio. The Newsday panel.
The gang is all here on a Monday in a new political week. Chris Sims is the Alberta director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation. How are you?
Excellent. Looking forward to Halloween this week. We've got the Death Clock coming out to Calgary because it's part of our Halloween decorations now. It's so scary.
Okay. All right. Okay. Jordan Paquette is senior consultant at Blue Sky Strategy Group. Great guy from PEI. How are you?
Great. Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
That's good. So you could call this deadline week for Mr. Trudeau. He is facing two deadlines, one today and one tomorrow. The one today is he's supposed to tell his unhappy Liberal MPs about his future, but I believe he has already done that. So I think it's kind of anticlimactic, I guess, when it comes to that. And then the Bloc has this deadline tomorrow: pass our legislation or we'll begin negotiations with other parties to bring down your government. So deadline week for Mr. Trudeau. What do you think is going to happen to Mr. Trudeau and his government, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of the most boring caucus revolt in history. He's had, 25 people came to him. He basically said, okay, thank you. Came a few hours later, basically said he's staying. I don't know if these MPs that have done this have any type of resolve or any type of ultimatum that they're actually going to give. I don't see them all just starting to leave caucus today. You already had one, Sean Casey, basically said, okay, that's fine, it's over now, we tried. I think at this point he's probably going to stick around as long as he can. He's going to say he's listened. He'll make changes. There'll be some cosmetic changes in cabinet based on the people that haven't left, but ultimately it's going to be same old. And then it's just going to be too late to make any changes in this case. On the Bloc side, I think, the Liberals are still going to do everything they can to stay in power. But at the same time, they're not going to be able to deliver on the Bloc's demands. So this is going to really show tomorrow the resolve of some of the opposition parties, especially the Bloc, to see if they're actually going to stand up to the government and try and topple them. I guess we'll see what he says tomorrow.
Right. What do you think is going to happen this week, Chris?
Unfortunately, I think mostly nothing is going to happen this week. And that's because we saw, like you pointed out, the strongest push possible last week. If members of Parliament were going to actually say, you know what, I want to get rid of the carbon tax, I want you to stop overspending, I'm worried about my constituents, they literally can't afford to heat their homes or eat, that would have happened then. They would have went and sat by themselves, very similar to what we saw during the Canadian Alliance days when a bunch of members of Parliament went and sat by themselves because they opposed the leadership of Stockwell Day. And so we didn't see that, and so I think it's going to fizzle. As far as the Bloc goes, they can huff and puff all they want. I do think the NDP will swoop in and find a way to, on a case-by-case basis, support the current government, because of course we know that a lot of pensions are coming up in February. So I still think we're going to have an election in spring after the budget.
Yeah, I believe that too. So let me ask you, in your capacity as someone with the Taxpayers Federation, OAS comes out of taxes. It's not like the Canada pension plan that's funded through contributions. It's purely right out of taxes, and this is a pretty big ask. Enhancing old age security earlier, starting at 65. And then you have supply management being protected from any future free trade negotiations. Now, we know that supply management means higher costs for these food items in Canada, milk, poultry, eggs. So just on the, as someone with the Taxpayers Federation, first of all, what do you think about that OAS ask? Chris?
It's a huge amount of money, and we've often said that, we could probably do this better if you just allow people to invest their own money by taxing them less, so throughout their entire working life, because the government just doesn't do things well. But here we are, we still have people who are now reaching 65 or 67, depending on the age that they're actually setting it at, and they, of course, want their money, and that's understandably so. Going forward for future generations, though, we don't know if that's sustainable. Like, maybe they should start really looking at drastically cutting spending so they can drastically cut people's taxes so we can all keep more of our own money and invest it in a smarter way, better than the government can do. So it's a huge, huge cost. And so, but I think at the end of the day, I do think the NDP is going to find a reason to support Trudeau if the Bloc votes against him. I think it's just going to be a juggling act, honestly, Rob, until spring.
Yeah, okay. I mean, do you see anything happening with this OAS and supply management business in the House or the Senate?
There are big voting blocks there, namely seniors and farmers. Good luck getting around those two massive voting blocks.
Yeah. Jordan, what do you see happening on those files?
Yeah, I agree with Chris. I mean, the supply management one, I think it's far along enough in the Senate. But with OAS, that is going to cause some major new spending, which is going to have the government really juggling. So as I mentioned before, this is going to really test the Bloc's resolve. They can't deliver on that whole $16 billion commitment that they've really proposed here. So like Chris, I do believe, like, even if the Bloc pulls the support, which I anticipate they probably should if they want to be taken seriously. She's right. The NDP will probably just hold off. They'll just abstain. The opposition parties still need all three of them to vote together to bring down the government. Like, they just don't have the numbers right now. So unless these 24, 25 Liberal MPs actually are taken seriously and vote with the opposition, the government can just sort of trickle along and actually just not get anything done.
Okay. When we come back, we'll turn our attention westward with the Alberta legislature reconvening. But the big backdrop of Alberta politics these days is the UCP leadership review of Danielle Smith, Premier Danielle Smith. We'll ask for some insight when we come back. I'm Rob Snow. This is Now You Know. This is News Radio.
thinking is not dead.
Now you know with Rob Snow.
Returns on News Radio.
It is our Newsday panel, and we're here with Chris Sims, the Alberta Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, and Jordan Paquette, who is a Senior Consultant with Blue Sky Strategy Group. So it's back to business for the Alberta legislature, but the backdrop, I think, for much of Alberta politics these days is the UCP's leadership review of Danielle Smith. Chris, what do you think is going to happen with that?
I think she's going to pass it well. I just finished going to a conference over the weekend where she was, again, one of the speakers, and that's where a lot of, you would describe as her base is. So very kind of freedom-oriented people, lower taxes, small government types, got another standing ovation. So I think that she's going to be fine. It was really critical and key for them to come out in early September with their Alberta Bill of Rights, which settled a lot of the rumblings that were happening over the summer. A lot of folks were saying she wasn't enshrining Alberta's own rights, so things like property rights, firearms rights, and healthcare choice rights in Alberta. And so she came out very early in September, just as the kids are going back to school, and nipped that in the bud. So I do think there will be obviously some opposition. Alberta is known for its fiery politics, which I love. It's very grassroots on all parties. And so, no, I think because she made that move early on enough that she'll pass fine. She does need to keep some key promises, though, especially to taxpayers in this coming budget. And the main one is reducing the income tax. She campaigned on that. She must follow through on that because it's going to save each family about $1,500. So that has got to be in there, black and white.
Okay. How do you see this playing out with Danielle Smith under review from the UCP leadership? What do you think, Jordan?
Yeah, I think ultimately she'll be fine. She's been holding and dangling enough red meat out there for the base. As Chris mentioned, Alberta is the home of this grassroots populist democracy, where people get together, they empower the voting bloc. There's not that same coordinated effort that I can see, at least sitting here in Ottawa, that there was against Jason Kenney, and a lot of that was some of the issues around COVID, lockdowns, mandates, all those types of things. I don't think that's there this time. There's a few different gripes, obviously, that people have, and I think Chris outlined some of those. But at this point, I think the Premier has been doing the smart work going around to these grassroots meetings, some of the conferences. And as I said, dangling some of these red meat issues out there, the Alberta Bill of Rights, and this new, what they're calling the Jordan Peterson law against some of these more regulatory bodies in certain professions and try to protect people on free speech matters. So I think at the end of the day, she'll win the day quite handily. And then all eyes would be on the budget, looking at some of these other tax measures that come in.
It's been said she is beholden to the fringe element of the UCP. What would you say to that, Chris?
I find that offensive, frankly.
Offensive?
The term
Why?
fringe used to be, when you and I were kids straight out of J school, Rob, fringe used to be reserved for like deeply extremist, like nasty views that I don't even want to give air to. It's not fringe to want Ottawa to back off. It is not fringe to want to control your own destiny when it comes to things like energy production here in this province. It's not fringe to want to be a law-abiding firearms owner. And it's not fringe to want to be able to make your own choices, both medically and financially, and to tell the government to go pound sand. That was standard for a long time, to mind your own business as a Canadian. And so being told that is a fringe element it's pretty weird.
Okay.
I think the spectrum has kind of shifted a lot.
Any thoughts on that, Jordan?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is just the new UCP party and the elements of what brought it together and then what makes up the current membership. I think it's I don't think there's just these fringe elements. I think the bulk of the membership is kind of in these areas where it shows that they were able to take down Jason Kenney before, and they're willing to hold their leaders to account. So Alberta's always had more of a rightward tilt in some of these other areas, and I think this is just allowing the grassroots members to do to basically hold on to the power that they do.
Okay, so Chris, give me a sense of things where you think given that you expect her to kind of pass this leadership review with flying colors kind of thing, where she is succeeding or what she did as opposed to Jason Kenney, where did he fall or fail?
Oh, to Jordan's point, that was largely because of what was happening during lockdown and changing your tune halfway through that. So, saying, for example, this is going to be the best summer ever, everybody open, and then all of a sudden locking businesses down, which, again, that isn't just financial, that cost, but obviously from the Taxpayers Federation perspective, we're very concerned with that. It was lost businesses, too. Like, people went bankrupt, which directly affects their family and their own well-being, their emotional health. To say one thing and then to turn around and do another is going to get you in deep trouble in Alberta. And even before lockdowns, if we go way back into previous history, you and I think we were both working in radio together when then Premier Jim Prentice said that maybe Albertans need to look in the mirror when it comes to finances. That people don't forget that stuff. And so she had to be very, very careful to make sure that she was not promising one thing and then doing another, because, again, there is a very healthy grassroots elements of every political party here in Alberta, including, I will also grant, to the NDP provincially here in Alberta. Meaning, if you don't do what you say you're going to do, your rank and file will hold you to account. And there are mechanisms for that. And leadership reviews are one of them. So she was pretty careful to make sure that she stayed within her promises. Yeah.
And
but again, I've got to say, she has to cut that income tax. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But seemed to be way out in front of it, like with a clear recognition, Jordan, of how important this is. Because there was a lot of outreach there, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I think they recognize, and looking back in the past at what happened to some previous leaders. Danielle Smith's been around a long time as a journalist, as a former politician. I think she realizes some of the mistakes that she made in the past, having run over to the Prentice side before. So I think all these things are there for her to learn from and know how quickly they had to work to get out in front of a lot of these issues and win over enough delegates to continue on through.
Okay. I think the three of us should start our own province, and the first thing we'll do is have an election.
Do one every 6 months. Why not?
Yeah. Boy, lots of provincial elections happening. It's provincial election day in Saskatchewan today. BC will probably be settled today. New Brunswick just had an election. Nova Scotia having an election. Doug Ford is expected to call an early election. We'll talk about what is happening with all of these elections. What does the federal dynamic have to do with it all? When we come back to our Newsday panel here on News Radio.
Now you know with Rob Snow continues on News Radio.
Elections everywhere I look. There are elections in a week from tomorrow. It's like the mother of all elections, the U.S. election. But let's focus on these provincial elections that have been called, are being called, with Chris Sims, Alberta Director, Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Jordan Paquette, Senior Consultant, Blue Sky Strategy Group. So Doug Ford, for example, in Ontario is expected to call an early election, not anytime soon, but for the spring in Ontario, spring of next year. Tim Houston over the weekend called the election in Nova Scotia. Wasn't supposed to be held until the summer of next year, July of next year. What does the federal dynamic, Jordan, have to do with the timing, do you think, of these provincial elections, early elections?
An advantage of incumbency right now, if there is one, is that you can really sort of look at the lay of the land across the country, what levers you have to pull, and kind of make decisions based on that. Because right now, incumbent governments are facing an uphill challenge in many, many areas. So if it gives some of these provinces that are going early an advantage to really set the agenda, set the ballot question for themselves and get out there, I think that's obviously what they're doing. As far as the federal side, I think a lot of these areas don't want to get mixed up in a federal election. So it's certainly a great line or excuse to use to say, well, we don't want to go at the same time as the Fed, so let's kind of have our own and do it early, looking at whenever that happens. But at the end of the day, I think it does come down to incumbency and really trying to set the ballot question like that.
All right, interesting. Okay, Chris, in a minute or less.
I think he's right, and there's also the element of using the popularity at the federal level. So we have Pierre Poilievre, who's the leader of the federal party for the Conservatives, riding very high in the polls. I'm sure people saw their announcement today to take the GST off of new home sales, which is crazy. That's a wonderful thing to hear. $50,000, they're saying, you could save on a house for just under $1 million. So that's a huge tax savings. So those sorts of announcements only increase his popularity. And if you're a sitting provincial Conservative premier, now may be a better time to go because of that reason. But you're absolutely right that
the rising tide lifting all boats, Chris.
Pardon me?
The rising tide lifting all boats kind of thing.
That's correct. Exactly.
All the blue boats in this case, I guess. Okay. We'll have to wrap it up there. Great to hear from both of you today. Enjoy the rest of your day. Stay warm. It's a little chilly out there. Some frost on the pumpkins.
Freezing.
Yeah. I'm Rob Snow. That's our Newsday panel. The Talkback is coming up next. First one of the week. Look forward to getting into some of the big issues with our callers right after the news here on News Radio.
It's time to talk back.
On Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now.
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
Discussion on the big issues of the day, and it's Monday, and we have a few topics in mind. One, what is your impression of the premiers who lead your province? So our radio show, we're on the air in 3 provinces. We're on in Alberta, Ontario, and Nova Scotia. And we would like to know, what do you think of the premiers leading your provinces? Do you think they're doing a good job, an okay job, bad job? Give me your assessment of Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, or Ontario Premier Doug Ford, or Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston, who just called an election. They're all Conservatives, at least in name. How are they doing, in your opinion? 1-833-668-2577. And the second topic that we want to ask you about is, what do you think could be done? What do you think should be done to fight poverty? There's this new report out today. We did an interview about it from Food Banks Canada that says usage of food banks is once again at a new record level. And it is now double what it was before the pandemic back in 2019. It's doubled in 5 years. And in addition to that, it's not just food bank use. It's the many, many stories about how local governments are having a very difficult time figuring out what to do with the growing number of homeless encampments across the country. I mean, these stories highlight how so many people are living on the edge and are barely getting by, going to food banks, living in tents in a Canadian winter. There are stories in the end about poverty. What can be done to fight poverty? Gosh, if you have some ideas, I would love to hear them. 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. That's our call-in line. David is back from his brief vacation out west, and he is screening the calls today. So if you're a first-time caller, just mention that to David, and we will make your call a priority. Your impressions, please, of the premier governing your province. What do you think of the job Danielle Smith is doing in Alberta? Or the job that, the good, the bad, the ugly, okay? The job that Doug Ford is doing in Ontario. Or the job that Tim Houston, the progressive conservative premier of Nova Scotia, the job that he's doing. Are these premiers, are they doing a good job, in your opinion? A fair job? A bad job? Just give me your honest opinion. And on poverty, what can be done about these news stories that we're reading? What can you do to improve this situation that we see across the country with record use of food banks, with so many homeless encampments all across the country? What are the issues? And what can be done to help people just a little bit more? For example, what would you think, because this is one of the recommendations in the report today from Food Banks Canada, what do you think about higher rates for social assistance, or what we used to call welfare, social assistance rates? What if government increased social assistance rates? Would you be okay with that? Or improved payments for people who rely on, say, a monthly disability check? There's a disability benefit, but when I speak to people in disability advocacy, they say it's not nearly enough. $2,400 a year. It's about an extra $200 a month, and it's not enough. I think about things like affordable housing or social housing. What could be done on that front? Whenever we approach this topic of fighting poverty, giving people more dignity in life, some people raise the idea of a basic income. That comes up from time to time as a possible solution. So that's where we want to start today, and we'll see how the next couple of hours go. All across Canada, we're having these issues, whether it's food bank usage or homeless encampments. I'd really love to kind of get at the heart of the matter and what you think could be done to improve the situation. And on the premiers, to our listeners in Alberta and Southern Ontario and Nova Scotia, we really want to hear from you on how you think your premier is doing at governing your province. Do you think they're doing a good job, a great job, a bad job, a downright terrible job? Talking about Danielle Smith, who's facing this leadership review from the UCP, or Doug Ford, who is thinking about calling an early election, not this year, but maybe in the spring. The election's not supposed to be held until 2026. And Tim Houston always said he was going to abide by his fixed election law, and now he hasn't. He's broken his own promise on that front, and there's going to be an early election in Nova Scotia. The election wasn't supposed to be held until the summer of next year, but the election campaign in Nova Scotia is underway right now, and Tim Houston and the rest of his progressive conservative candidates are out there and they're asking for your vote. I would like to know, how are these premiers doing, in your opinion? 1-833-668-2577, 1-833-668-2577. And again, if you're a first-time caller, just mention that to David, and we will make your call a priority. We'll be right back with your calls. It's Talk Back. I'm Rob Snow on a Monday. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
So a pair of topics in the mix for today's topics. One of them is the premiers where you live. Alberta, Ontario, Nova Scotia. How are the premiers doing, in your opinion, at governing the province where you live? Are they doing a good job, bad job, somewhere in between? All of these premiers, the United Conservative Party in Alberta, Premier Danielle Smith, Progressive Conservative Party in Ontario, Doug Ford, Progressive Conservative Party in Nova Scotia, with Tim Houston. They all say they're conservatives to varying degrees. I'm just curious, do you think they're doing a good job as premiers of your province? And on poverty, what can be done to help people who are, really, really struggling? to make ends meet. I mean, we have a news report today. Record usage of food banks. Last year was a record, and this year set a new record. More than 2 million visits a month to the country's food banks, and all kinds of stories in the news about the growing number of homeless encampments and local governments, municipal governments really struggling to cope. Using food banks, people living in tents seems to be more common these days. What can be done in the fight against poverty? What are your ideas? If you have any, please share them here. 1-833-668-2577. Let's go to Dale in Calgary. Dale, thanks for calling. Dale, hi there.
How are you?
I'm good, Dale. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Just calling you from Calgary here, Rob.
Yeah.
First of all, home encampments never happened to be in Canada until Trudeau got in 2015. I did some research while I was sitting there, and they were not known to be in Canada until they started growing at the end of 2016. And, of course, now we see what we've got. That's compliments of our friend Mr. Trudeau. It's a terrible thing. It's created poverty. It's actually very quite sad when I drive by these places, and we'll see these people.
Yeah.
Especially, I just got back from Vancouver, and then I was downtown Calgary, and I've never seen Calgary as bad as it is, and it's all related to one man and his party who have to be thrown out. The other thing I'd like to talk to you about.
Okay. But just before we move along, then. Okay. Yeah. So you throw Trudeau out, and you get a new government, and I'm guessing you would hope that that would be a conservative government. And then what do you want the conservative government to do? That could lower the number of people who have to visit a food bank every month, or decrease the number of people who are, living in a tent in a Canadian winter.
I think the only thing I could suggest or think about anyway is going out and first of all dropping all those drug dens that Trudeau's set up, so that people can go get free drugs or free whatever. I mean, that is certainly not helping. I think we need to go find places for these people to live, like low rent.
More affordable housing.
Poilievre come up with an idea that Trudeau stole. There's a lot of warehouses that we the people own, that they could convert them to apartments or condos, let those people live there for $100 a month, whatever. It doesn't matter.
Yeah. So government-owned buildings, converting them into more affordable housing, right? That's a good idea. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay.
Convert it. You even put like a little restaurant in there, and for minimal dollars, that feed these people. It's not that hard to do if they would just do it. And the whole idea of the homeless encampments it's all on Trudeau for what he's done. And I don't know how he can drive downtown of any city and not know that he's not responsible for that. But we as Canadians, with Poilievre, can fix it if we would just put our head down, butt up, and help these people and use the space that we are paying taxes on and put it to good work.
Okay. So on the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, what do you think of the job that she's doing?
She's doing a very good job. She's had a couple trips. Everybody has a couple trips on when they're finding their way around. But overall, she's doing an extremely good job. I like the laws that she's passing about protecting Albertans' rights. Every time I see it, I go onto TikTok or Instagram, and everybody from across Canada keeps on saying, "I wish I'm moving to Alberta," or "I wish Danielle was our premier." Like, making sure that Trudeau can't come take our guns, or the RCMP can't take our guns. That's unbelievably great, because most people in Alberta, we don't have handguns. Well, some guys do. I know a couple of guys who do, but they go straight to the driving range, or not driving range, it's the shooting range. That's all they do. Or else when they're hunting, they take them out then. But everybody, 99% of people are law-abiding, and there's no reason to come get the guns. The other thing I like is the shots. We don't have to take shots. If Trudeau comes out and says, "Oh my God, the flu's out again, you guys all got to take a shot," we don't have to. And I think that's absolutely imperative, because it was a sham last time going around, and Trudeau played it, and look where we're at. And then the other thing that she's doing is she's creating such good heritage trust fund boards, or building it, I should say. It was already there. But building it up again for the good of Albertans, to get our debt gone, and to make sure that we can move forward on a great way. Now, it's going to be fun to watch Nenshi, because, after he destroyed Calgary, I have no idea why anybody would put him in charge of the NDP, but that's good. That'll keep the NDP out of charge for a longer time. But as far as I'm concerned, yes, Daniel's made a couple missteps. No big deal. Overall, she's doing a great job.
But overall, you think she's doing a good job as the Premier of Alberta?
Yes, sir.
Yes. Okay, Dale, you've got us off to a good start there. Thank you so much. We're going to stop here, and then Chris, we'll take a couple of calls from Nova Scotia. People want to talk about the performance of Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston, who called an election this weekend, an early election, going against his own fixed election law. So we'll ask about Tim Houston, how he's doing as Premier of Nova Scotia. Yeah, how are the premiers doing where you live? Alberta, Ontario, Nova Scotia. We'd love to know. And so many people going to food banks, so many people living in tents. The war on poverty. What can we do to fight poverty in this country? 1-833-668-2577. I'm Rob Snow. It's News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
One of the questions we're asking is, how would you describe the job that the Premier is doing where you live, whether you're in Alberta, Ontario, or Nova Scotia? Those are three conservative governments there, varying degrees of conservatism. But do you think they're doing a good job? What would you say? And we're also talking about poverty. What more could be done to fight poverty in Canada? New report about record usage of food banks, 2 million visits a month to food banks in Canada. Growing number of homeless encampments. Stories all over the news about that. The fight against poverty. What can be done in the fight against poverty? 1-833-668-2577. Chris in Martins Point, Nova Scotia. Hi there, Chris.
Good afternoon, Rob. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
Premier Houston, or Tim Bitt, as I like to call him.
Okay.
I'll give him a fair, and
Okay.
the only reason I give him a fair is that he seems to be. They're trying to address the medical system in Nova Scotia, whereas the previous government just kicked it down the road. They're actually trying to do something, and my wife and I actually got a family doctor after waiting for 3.5 years.
Oh wow. Okay.
So no things in different things like now they're trying to streamline prescriptions and things like that to take it off the pressure off doctors in the ERs. They are trying to do something anyways. I think they're putting effort into it.
You would say they're making progress.
I would say they're making progress. They're certainly they're going about it the right way, I think. But now the only reason I gave him the fair was that there's a couple things with this guy that I know politicians can't be trusted. That's the nature of their profession. But he is more overt with it when he doubled down on the Coastal Protection Act, and then as soon as he got in, he reneged on that and scrapped the whole thing. That was pretty obvious. That one down here didn't go well with the people in the country. That's for sure.
Okay.
So right there's a trust issue. Now, this latest thing where he went against his own word again and called an early election when he called out the Liberals on the same thing, I think that's really, to me now, this guy can't be trusted. His word isn't worth the oxygen it takes for him to even make a promise. So,
okay.
Fair, yeah, he's doing what he's doing, but no, I cannot trust the man any longer.
Doing a fair job, but you have trust issues.
Well, yes, I do. The Coastal Protection Act was the big one. We needed that in the worst possible way, and his government was one that actually it was unanimous between all the parties that Nova Scotia needs to protect our coastline, and then for him to turn around and just scrap it, no, that's a no-no. So,
all right, Chris.
Fair,
thank you, Chris.
Fair.
Good to hear from you. Yep. Fair assessment there. Michael in Cape Breton. Michael.
Mr. Snow, how you doing today?
Sir. I'm good. Thank you. So you want to have
what you're learning today, Rob, is and good questions you're asking. What you're learning today is why people are going around bent over, but till they take the time to get educated and become more informed on the policies that governments are passing down at the big companies that are controlling their governments, where they can't make a decision on behalf of the people because they're beholden to the companies. Now, you were talking about food banks right back to the beginning of the pandemic. They should roll the prices back. They allowed big agri come in here, and the big supermarkets and that take advantage of the system, and they jack the prices up to whatever they wanted, or they try to fool people. You'll get double if you pay this. And what the bottom line was, when they were done, you ended up with nothing. So tell the people, tune in, and start becoming more informed on what's going on. I suggest they go out and vote NDP.
All right. Okay. Thank you. Well, we'll see what happens. You're in an election campaign right now. They say campaigns matter. Did not hear an assessment of Premier Tim Houston. But given that you're encouraging people to vote for the New Democrats, I guess that speaks for itself. Okay. We'll be back right after the news on the Talk Back today, Monday. 1-833-668-2577.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Two topics for today's Talk Back. One of them is the premiers where you live, if you're in Alberta, Ontario, or Nova Scotia. How are they doing at governing your province? What would you say? And poverty. What can be done to help people who are really struggling to make ends meet? We have a news report today. Record use of food banks. Okay. Another record. It was a record last year, is a record this year. And so many news reports about the growing number of homeless encampments all across the country, looking for ideas on fighting poverty. How did it get so bad? What could be done about it? Let's go to Wade in Alberta, wants to talk about Premier Smith. Go ahead, Wade. Hi there.
Mr. Snow, how are you?
I'm good. My father's name is Mr. Snow. You can call me Rob.
Okay, Rob. A friend of mine's son just married a girl by the name of Crystal Snow. I don't know if it's any relation.
No relation. No relation here. No.
Premier Smith in Alberta is a warrior.
Okay.
And my hero.
Your hero.
And I believe that she is the most intelligent, informed, passionate premier that truly has Alberta in her heart that I have ever heard speak since Ralph Klein.
Wow, that's high praise.
It's deserved high praise.
Okay. So what is it that makes you admire her so much then?
Well, the part of her being my hero is I started emailing about a year ago to the Prime Minister and all the premiers all over the country because I wanted to eliminate internet access on portable electronic devices for children. And I got laughed at, but even you laughed at me. You said, oh, good luck with that, and many people did. And all of a sudden, and I'm not saying it was me, because there's many, many other people and groups that were in line with what I was saying. Well, she took them out of the schools.
Yes.
And that makes her my hero.
Okay.
And I'm not done. And if I have to die on a hill, I will die on the hill of fighting for freedom and eliminating internet access on portable electronic devices for children, because I believe that those social media platforms are the most brainwashing propaganda tool known to mankind.
Well, I mean, they're certainly having an impact on the mental health and well-being of young people. I don't think that's in doubt anymore. I don't think it's in doubt at all, right? Yep. Okay, Wade. Yep. High praise for Premier Smith from Wade in Sylvan Lake, Alberta. To Ted calling from Nova Scotia. First-time caller. Hello, Ted.
Hello, Rob. How are you?
I'm good, Ted. How are you? So Premier Tim Houston is in an election campaign now. What do you think of the job that he's doing?
Well, I'll just give you a little explanation of why I'm calling about Tim Houston. When he was running for premier, we had Liberal premiers for 2 or 3 terms before that. And my wife and I owned a 4-unit apartment building. And we were holding our rents as low as we could, as best we could, and to make them available for people who didn't have a lot of money to spend for rent.
Okay.
So that's sort of the background. And so what Tim said when he was running was that he would absolutely not put a cap on rentals, on rent costs. And not 6 months after he was in, he put a cap on rent costs of 2%. Now,
so in other words, he imposed rent control. So he imposed rent control, you're saying, Ted?
Yes.
Yes.
And on the surface, that sounds like a good thing. However, you have to determine who owns the building that's doing the renting. I'm not a multinational corporation. I'm a mom and pop who have spent the last 14 years trying to build up a little bit of a nest egg for when we retire, which we are now. And the reason we voted for Tim Houston was because he was basically saying that he would not jeopardize our ability to rent those units at a reasonable price and not have to pay for some of the things that were going on by the big corporations that own the lease and the rentals nowadays in this area in Halifax. So that's number one.
Okay.
Number two, the other issue that you're talking about is homelessness and affordability. And first off, I'll say I'm not and never have been a politician. And I do not have all the answers. I don't have any answers, actually. But one thing I do believe, and that is that the government is not the answer.
Okay.
I believe that if there is an issue in the economy, that the government should get out of the way, incentivize individuals like myself to try and come up with solutions and not bloat government to try and take care of something they know nothing about. That's it.
Okay. So just on the whole, then, he betrayed you on rent control. So for that reason, I'm guessing you wouldn't vote for him again then. Fair enough?
Well, no, he's a liar. He's a liar. And I don't, I'm not perfect. I lie too. I guess we all do. But when someone runs on a platform of not doing something and then within 6 months, literally 6 months into his first term, he does exactly the opposite. To me, that tells you who the person is.
Okay.
And
all right. Fair enough.
I've been voting conservative since my early 40s, and he's a conservative, so it was a good fit for me, but I would never vote for him again.
Well, okay. All right, Ted. Thank you, sir. Thank you for your call. I'm Rob Snow. It's Talk Back. A couple of lines available there now. Why don't you grab one of them? Join the conversation at 1-833-668-2577. This is News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Of premiers and fighting poverty, two topics for the day. Maggie is in Alberta. Hi, Maggie.
Hello, how are you?
I'm good, Maggie. How are you?
I'm well, thank you for asking.
Oh, that's great to hear.
We're talking about all these issues, I suppose. And first off, let's give Danielle Smith some kudos there. I think, like the previous caller had mentioned, she does have some passion about what she's doing. She seems, she's getting the voice out there and getting some issues resolved. I'm not saying she's 100%, but she's certainly, a good fit for Alberta right now.
Okay.
Well, question, there's two things. We know the family dynamics have changed hugely. And I'm 65, so when I look at it, parents have split up. Kids are kind of on their own more than they used to be. There seems to be no pride, borders, rules for these kids, and they're kind of wandering lonely. We talk about mental issues, drug abuse, alcohol abuse, gambling now. It's readily available for kids. I think we have to start looking at the family dynamic and how we can improve on that side. But what I have a real issue with, I'm just driving in from southern Alberta through Calgary and then on to Edmonton, and we talk about affordable housing. And I'm thinking, my goodness, I think what we need to establish is what is affordable housing. You know, what is it can afford? And I'm seeing right now when I see the monstrosities being built. You know, I grew up with 8 people in a house that was 1,500 square foot, 2 bathrooms. And, you know, we all did okay. And so the entitlement and what we can actually afford. But I don't look at affordable housing as building all these condo units where people that buy into it, you know, they end up with condo fees for the rest of their life as long as they're in there. They end up with, it's almost like a second mortgage. Why aren't we building a small house that people can afford and graduate up eventually into the next level when they start having families?
Okay. Well, I think for a lot of people that is the condo now. That is that 700 square foot shoebox in the sky.
Why?
You know?
Why? Because you're never out of debt with it. You know, we used to build a house, burn the mortgage. You continued paying taxes, utilities, and all.
Sure. Yeah.
But what they're creating, if you look in France, they're creating cesspools. It's like putting people in cages. You know, the big guy's getting the dollar bill at the end of the day, but these kids are stressing. They're financially, you know, in debt because they forgot to pay the condo fee, and it just keeps adding up. I mean, who's winning on that one?
So what does your version of affordable housing look like?
Hey, give it back to 1,000 square foot home, a plot of land, and give some pride to these people. And when they graduate from there, because they can learn to manage bills, you know, pay the mortgage, pay the utilities, and they start outgrowing it, you know, it's something they can handle financially. You tell me where they're ahead with the condo. You tell me it's the new norm. It's the way we're going. So we need to look back at the old way, Rob.
Okay.
You know,
all right.
Same thing.
All right, Maggie. You know, thank you. Thank you, Maggie.
Thank you. Have a great one.
Interesting points. Yeah, you too. Safe travels through Alberta there. Bernie is calling from Mississauga. Hi, Bernie.
Yeah, how you doing, Rob?
I'm good, Bernie. Good to hear from you.
Yeah,
thanks.
Good. I just seen like the 3 premiers that you mentioned. If I'd rate them from the outside looking in, I give them a C. They're all at C. They're governed, but they're not doing anything creative or anything to change the situation that's happening in the country. As far as the homeless people, those 25% of the people that are below the poverty level, there should be a guaranteed annual income. And also, to back that up, they should roll back the price increases retroactive to the pandemic, because that's when it all set in and really blew up in everybody's faces. So I think that the government makes 2 big decisions, a guaranteed annual income and roll back the prices so they can afford to live.
All right. I don't know. How do you roll back the prices? I don't understand.
Just make a law in the government and say your prices are going back, and let the food industry and the energy industry and everything absorb the costs, because they're making record profits. It's been shown on their bank accounts. The banks are making record profits, and yet we have all these people that have to be marginalized by living in a tent and can't afford basic groceries, going to food banks and everything. It's a disgrace in the country, and it's not only on Trudeau, it's also on this country. In the last 10 years, we had about 6 or 7 progressive conservative provincial governments that did nothing to alleviate the problem.
All right, Bernie. Thank you. Good to hear from you. Yeah, you old socialist, you. Okay, Aaron in Calgary. Aaron, hi there.
Hi, Rob. How are you?
Hi, Aaron. I'm good, Aaron. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you. I love your show. I listen to it every day.
I appreciate that. That's very kind of you.
Very interesting. Go ahead.
How do you think Premier Smith is doing?
I think Premier Smith is the best thing to have into Alberta in a very long time. There's a gentleman who called in earlier, called her a warrior, and I would second everything that he said. So I mean, enough on that. But in terms of homelessness in this country and the food bank, I think that the 2 items are actually tied together. I think it's human nature to do as little as possible for the most amount possible. And I think that part of the problem with food banks is also tied to immigration. You have literally videos on YouTube that show international students that they can come here and live and eat for free at the food bank. I mean, this is like it's like a campaign. It's like, It's out there on the internet. You know, people have this information. I don't know if you've driven by a food bank lately, but when you do, there are $100,000 Mercedes and Denali vehicles loading their trunks with.
Really?
Yeah, I actually worked across from a food bank, and I see it every day, especially around the holidays. You have, you know, luxury cars putting food into their trunks, and the food bank's, standpoint is, well, we're there for everyone. But the thing is that as things get harder and things get more expensive, people are going to generally gravitate towards what is free and easy. And then in terms of homelessness as well, I think the answer is rehabilitation. I mean, these homelessness is tied to mental illness and drug abuse. And, you know, these people need to be cared for. They need to be rehabilitated into some way to be functional members of society. If you give people free drugs and free food, they're going to do nothing, especially if they are inclined to be dysfunctional in some way societally. And I mean, that is basically the basis of communism, why it didn't work, is because people will do nothing for something.
Okay. All right. All right.
Yeah.
I got you, Aaron. I'm not saying I agree with everything you're saying, but I appreciate your opinion and you sharing it, and you call back again sometime. Thank you. 1-833-668-2577. It's Talkback on a Monday on News Radio.
You want everyone to know.
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
So not a lot of time left in this segment. If you're on the line, please hang on the line through the news at the top of the hour. We'll take your call in hour number 2. But let's go to George in Halifax. Wants to talk about the performance of Premier Houston. Go ahead, George. Hi there.
Hi, Rob. How are you?
I'm good, George. Thank you. So what do you think about the job your premier's doing?
I mean, I wasn't overly fond of him until recently. I'm in my early 40s, and I always thought to myself, with a politician, oh, what can they do? What can they do for you? And I always thought to myself, well, drop taxes. And I almost thought of it as, like, comically, because I always thought, oh, it'll never happen anyways. I've never heard of any politician ever dropping the taxes. And then Tim Houston drops the HST by 1%. And I know some people are saying, oh, well, he's calling a snap election, and that sort of is, you know, free. But if that is the case, and then the next person who wants to run has their ideas to drop another percentage, I'm good with that. I'm happy with the fact that I've finally seen a drop in the HST, which I applaud him.
Okay. So a thumbs up for you, for Tim Houston then. Okay.
Yeah, he took you know, healthcare here was already a mess, and he sort of ran on the fact that he'd fix it, and I thought, well, no one's going to be able to fix that, but they all lie to get in, but it's what they do for you, and I understand the other caller that was here, he didn't help him out, but, you know, dropping the percentage of the HST helps everybody here. So
okay. All right. Fair enough. Thank you very much. So Rakesh in Calgary, Ryan in Nova Scotia, Mike in Nova Scotia, you'll have to stay on the line because if I bring any one of you on now, you'd only have about 45 seconds to make your point. I really want to give you more time to talk than that. As we talk about the premiers, where you live, Alberta, Ontario, Nova Scotia, how are they doing at governing in your province? Good job, bad job? They're all conservative to varying degrees, and they're all facing challenges. In Alberta, Danielle Smith under a leadership review. In Ontario, lots of speculation about a snap election. And in Nova Scotia, the election has been called. So we'd really like to hear from you on that. And on poverty, what can be done to fight poverty? What can be done to make a dent in the record usage of food banks or the growing number of homeless encampments all across the country? 1-833-668-2577, right after the news on News Radio.
It's time to talk back
on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
Call now
And have your say.
1-833-668-2577.
We've been asking for your impressions of the Premier governing your province. What do you think of the job Danielle Smith is doing in Alberta, or Doug Ford in Ontario, or Tim Houston in Nova Scotia, who just called an election? Are these premiers doing a good job, fair job, bad job? Just give me your honest opinion. And what can be done to alleviate poverty? What could you do to improve the situation that we see? Record usage of food banks, so many homeless encampments across the country. Those are our topics. 1-833-668-2577. Right back to the phones. Rakesh in Calgary. Rakesh, hi there.
Hi, my idea is builders are making good profit on our real estate markets, like when they are building houses, and so they are selling new houses on a very, very high profit. So they are making good profit. I heard that they are making $200,000 per house. So it's very, very high. There should, until you put any cap on their builder profits, you cannot make it affordable for public. And second thing, you cannot control inflation with the monopoly or imperfect competition in the market. It's an economic principle. You need to bring full competition in market, or you need some like investors from foreigners. That's my idea.
Okay. So what would you do? I mean, if you think that, say, home builders are making too much profit, for example, and I can't speak to the numbers that you're citing. I don't know if they're true or accurate in any way.
I may be a little bit wrong, but I'm not 100% wrong.
Yeah. Okay. But what if that is indeed the case, and you think they're making too much money? What do you do about it?
No, they are making, the government is giving them opportunity to make money. They should put at least some profit cap. That you cannot make 5% or 10% profit.
Okay.
More than
so
10%.
here's what I see some municipalities doing, Rakesh. Let me run this by you. Let's say you and I wanted to build a condo tower, for example. Okay. We would have to set so many units aside at what would be known as an affordable rate, and the government comes up with a formula. And so many of those units in that condo building would have to be at, say, below the market rate. What would you think about an idea like that? Rakesh? Did we lose Rakesh? All right, he's gone. Okay, that's too bad. Let's go to Ryan in Nova Scotia then. Ryan.
How you doing today, Rob?
I'm okay, Ryan. It's a bit trying today, so working through some technical stuff. But Ryan, you want to talk about the Premier of Nova Scotia just called an election, Tim Houston. How's he doing, in your opinion?
Well, not great, considering every single election promise that he made during the previous election, he's broken. And I do mean literally every one. He promised no rent cap, and he brought that in. He promised something called the Better Paycheck Guarantee, which was supposed to help affordability. Never happened. Promised to fix health care. We have twice as many people on the health care list waiting for a family doctor as we did when he took power. He promised to put a tax on out-of-province homeowners. He did that and then backtracked almost immediately because he had people that don't live in this province and can't vote for him complain that they had to pay an extra $50 a year in taxes. He has broken literally every promise that he has made. And then the most recent one, on Friday, he was here in Halifax on our local news radio saying, no, I am not calling an election. And the very next day, he called an election. You cannot trust the man.
Okay.
Now,
all right, so you're not a fan. I got you. You're not a fan.
No,
okay.
Not at all. Right. And as far as affordability goes,
yes. Well, poverty, I would say this goes beyond affordability. I mean, we're talking, right. If you're going to a food bank and living in a tent, that's poverty.
Yeah, life's not great. No, that's right.
Yeah.
Now, I don't have any solutions, but here's an idea.
Okay.
In I think it's Norway, or it's one of the Icelandic countries. What they did a few years back is they went to the pharmaceutical companies and said, you're limited in how much profit you're allowed to make on each prescription. So you're allowed to make money, but you're limited to how much money you can make. And of course, all the companies threatened, if you do that, we're just not going to sell drugs in your country anymore. And which was an empty threat, of course, because given the choice between $1 million in profit or none, they're still going to choose the profit. So maybe restricting profits in certain areas of the economy might be a solution.
Okay. All right. It's an idea. Thank you, Ryan. Thank you for your call. 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. Some lines available there. It's been pretty busy in the last hour or so. Mike in Nova Scotia. Thanks for calling, Mike. Hi there.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, Mike. How are you?
Good, thank you. I just want to talk about the poverty thing, and I believe like now it's a little bit too late to try to fix what's going on, but what we could do is like fix what could happen in the future, so the next generation doesn't add up to our homeless numbers. There's some things that could be done, like when we brought in the gambling, when we legalized the gambling, that I'm sure fueled up the homelessness situation. What I'm trying to say is that every year we try to fix this year, but we never fix it. But we can fix the future. Like try to keep kids in school as long as possible. Try to help the next generation of families to be able to afford somewhat a basic living. Throwing money at it now, yeah, it's going to help people, but it's not going to fix the problem. So if we fix communities, if we fix school, health for the future, then we're not going to add up to this homeless. We're going to be able to reduce it. It might take a couple generations, but at least we can help that happen now.
You think the government has to make more investments in things like education, healthcare, things like that?
I absolutely. Like education.
Okay.
If you educate our kids properly and you try to keep them in school as long as possible, and like even like extra curriculum like sports and community center where the kids can like feel like a kid and not being on the street and get those bad ideas of like gangs and whatnot, which can add up to our problem in the future. Yeah. I don't know. I think we should start with our kids, try to help them for their future. And it sucks because we're not going to reap the benefit now, but it's definitely going to help our country for the future.
Investment in the future. Yeah. Especially like that idea about, getting, whether it's sports or music or dance or something, or the arts, to some degree. Yeah. Very good idea. Idle hands do the devil's work, as they say. Okay, Mike, thank you.
Exactly.
Yeah,
no problem.
Good.
Have a good day.
You too. 1-833-668-2577, hour number 2 of Talkback here on News Radio.
Have something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
The performance of premiers, been talking about that today. Various premiers across the country, like Premier Houston in Nova Scotia, just called an election. Doug Ford expected to call a snap election. Premier Smith in Alberta about to go under a leadership review from the United Conservative Party in Alberta, members there. And fighting poverty, record use of food banks, growing number of homeless encampments. What can be done to improve the situation there? Help fight poverty. Paul in Fergus. Hi, Paul.
Hi there. Hello. Thanks for taking my call.
You're welcome.
I'm going to say something that, to me, it's a very, very simple solution. The government caused this problem. It's a supply and demand issue, right? We don't have enough supply of homes for the demand. So a drastic cut in the immigration numbers, like cutting them by 50% over the next few years, right, will free up homes, free up apartments, and then, the prices will start to drop. It's all supply and demand. And when the prices start to drop, the big corporations and the foreign owners will unload all of their properties, will put even more properties out on the market. And this is a solution that it's not going to cost any money. There's no investment for the government to put in. It's simply the problem that we have has been caused by record high immigration numbers, and it's all about supply and demand. We need immigration. Granted, we need it. And now there's a big government push and incentive to try to build more homes. But when you have that kind of pressure to build more houses, all you're doing is causing an inflationary pressure. You need deflationary pressure, to solve the housing crisis. Because, you look at people not able to put food on the table. If their rent dropped by $500 a month, that's plenty of food to put on the table. If your mortgage dropped by $1,000 a month, right, because now that house dropped a price of $100,000 less now because there's more out in the market, that would solve the problem, for what's happening right now.
All right. So the federal government last week, I'm sure you're paying attention to this, announced a cut in immigration. Big backtrack from the Trudeau Liberals. And it is a significant reduction, about 24% over 3 years. What do you think of that?
Because they've had a 200% increase over the past 5 years. Under Harper, it was about 200,000 to 250 a year. Under Trudeau, it's been over 500,000 for the past 5 or 6 years right now. And it's just not enough. It needs to be a drastic cut. Because to me, that's the only solution. Throwing more tax dollars, telling me as a taxpayer to pay more money to incentivize builders to build more homes and so forth and so forth. All you're doing is paying one person for another, just passing the buck, right? This was something that the government, has to admit that it was a failure. The numbers were too high. They didn't do their proper calculations properly. I mean, it's insane to allow so many people without understanding that you need someplace to house these people.
Of course, yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's a mad scramble afterwards to build homes after the fact. Like I said, it's just causing inflationary pressure. If you cut the demand, and demand can be controlled by the government, right? Just cut the demand, and the next thing you know, prices will come down. It's all supply and demand. It's just that simple. Less government intervention.
Okay. If I wish it was that simple. You make it sound simple, but my gosh, if it was that simple, wouldn't you think they'd have done it by now? Okay. Jonathan in Calgary. Thank you, Jonathan, for calling. Hi, Jonathan.
Hi, Rob. Hello, Rob.
Yeah, good to hear from you, Jonathan. Go ahead.
Thank you for taking my call.
You're welcome.
You're right. I respect with the view with the first person. There's no such thing as simple solution for this, but to my opinion, there are three things that causes all this problem. Number one is we are part of this. Number one is putting the competent and the right leader that runs our country.
Okay.
We should not be affected by the push and pull of their drama, their popularity, and everything. And we should put the right leader to run the country, so that running the country is not an easy job. And then that's the number one. Second, economy. Government should support the businesses, the Canadian companies, businesses, so that we can compete in the global, globally, and we can compete.
Okay.
It's not just us here in Canada; it's global.
Sure.
And then third, the residential real estate, the housing, it should be protected. It should be tightly regulated. Like, for example, some people who have money, they are putting their money into housing market to protect, to store their wealth, to protect their wealth.
Of course, yeah.
Of course, there's nothing wrong with it. But this is residential real estate, where people can, where people can go home after work and go back to work again. And then the people who have money...
Are you saying that shouldn't be allowed? I'm sorry, Jonathan. Are you saying that shouldn't be allowed, that people shouldn't be able to, say, hold real estate for investment purposes, residential real estate for investment purposes?
There should be a strict rules on this one. Like, for example,
there's all kinds of rules about it.
But the residential property should be strictly regulated, in my opinion. The commercial,
they are strictly regulated.
Okay.
Yeah,
especially the ordinary houses like 200 condos and 500 to 800,000 houses. It should be protected. The basic housing and the middle housing should be protected. Those 1 million above, it can be played by a lot of people who have money. There's nothing wrong with it. And then, but this one, it should be tightly regulated. Like, for example, in my case, in Calgary, last summer, I want to buy $500, $600 home in our neighborhood. But in just a matter of days, the house is gone because there's some big players from Toronto, Vancouver are playing the market, something like that. And then those players who have money, it will drive the prices of the houses go up because it will create a competition and everything. So these three should be regulated. These are the main things: the leader, the economy, and the housing, the residential, particularly the residential housing.
Okay.
Because,
we're tight on time. We'll have to go now, Jonathan. But I really thank you for your call and for giving it some thought and sharing your opinions today. I'm Rob Snow, talking about poverty, record usage of food banks, so many homeless encampments. What can be done about that? A lot of people pointing to housing costs. Have to do something about that. And how's the Premier doing where you live? Not a lot of praise, although big lead in the polls. In an election campaign now for Premier Houston, but we're talking about Premier Smith, Premier Ford as well. This is Now You Know. It's Talkback on News Radio.
Something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
So we've been talking about poverty today, ideas to alleviate poverty with a new news report about record usage of food banks, 2 million visits. 2 million visits a month to Canada's food banks and numerous news stories in the media today and in recent days about the growing number of homeless encampments and how, local governments are really struggling to cope. Using food banks, living in tents, it seems more common these days. What could be done to fight poverty? If you have any ideas, we'll take your call right after the news, 1-833-668-2577. And the premiers where you live, Alberta, Ontario, Nova Scotia, they have 3 conservative premiers there, all leading conservative parties to varying degrees. Danielle Smith leading the United Conservative Party of Alberta, Doug Ford leading the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario. Might call an election early. Tim Houston just called an election in Nova Scotia, leading the Progressive Conservative Party of Nova Scotia. I wouldn't say they're all the same stripe of conservative, but how are they doing in your opinion? Share your thoughts, please. Right after the news, more of your calls on Talkback here on News Radio.
Something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talkback on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
We've been talking about your assessment of the premiers where you live. 3 in particular, Alberta, Ontario, and Nova Scotia, all conservative premiers. How are they doing? And we've been talking about fighting poverty with these news reports about homeless encampments and record food bank usage. Every single line available right now, by the way. The wait won't be too long. If you've never called us before, make today. 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. Danielle Smith in Alberta, I think, would be the most conservative of those 3 premiers. She's always been known to have a libertarian bent. Doug Ford in Ontario is more of a populist. And fiscally, I mean, when it comes to government spending, he's not really a conservative at all. I wouldn't say. He's a very big spender. He doesn't raise taxes. He has a pretty good record on taxes, but he loves to spend money. Like this latest thing, he's going to send everyone in Ontario a check for $200. David's going to be cashing a check for $200 sometime next year. What are you going to do with your newfound riches, David? Your Doug bucks, $200 just before what is widely anticipated to be a snap election called for next spring in Ontario. $200 to every person in Ontario, all borrowed money. Okay, all $3 billion of it. And in Nova Scotia, Tim Houston just called a snap election. The provincial election campaign wasn't supposed to be until July of next year, but Houston's PC party is leading in all the polls, so I guess he's pulling the plug early, hoping to win a majority government, another majority government. I would say he's more of a middle-of-the-road conservative. He's not a populist like Doug Ford, and he's certainly not, I don't think, as conservative as Danielle Smith is in Alberta. But Tim Houston has also had his issues with Trudeau on things like the carbon tax, for example. But whatever the stripes of these premiers, they all share the same responsibilities, and the two big ones for any provincial government and the two most expensive programs for any provincial governments are they're running the healthcare system and running the public education system. Those are the two biggest jobs for any provincial government and any premier. So keep that in mind when you give us a call and assess the performance of these premiers. For example, how is Danielle Smith doing at trying to improve Alberta's healthcare system? How's the healthcare system where you are? Or Doug Ford, how is he trying to improve Ontario's healthcare system? Or in Nova Scotia, when Tim Houston was first running for premier, that was his big promise. I remember that campaign. The Nova Scotia Liberals are ruining the healthcare system, and if you elect a PC government, we'll fix it up. Well, it's been a few years now. It's a big job trying to fix a healthcare system. All the premiers are struggling with healthcare. Has progress been made by that government in Nova Scotia on improving the healthcare system in that province? Is it any better? What about the schools? And the public education system? How's the school system in Alberta? Or in Ontario? Or in Nova Scotia? Is it getting any better? Is it getting worse? For example, the situation with teachers or classrooms. Do you have a shortage of teachers? Overcrowded classrooms, the lack of resources, schools overcrowded. Or is progress being made on those fronts? Just some examples. Just want to know, how are these premiers doing in your opinion? 1-833-668-2577. 1-833-668-2577. Let's take Rob's call in Calgary. Thanks for calling, Rob.
Hey, Rob. Sorry.
Hi, Rob. That's okay.
Yeah, I have to agree with the gentleman who said that we need to cut immigration by 50%. Okay. I believe the average yearly home, folks who were somewhat home deficient, whatever you want to call it, was last year, I believe, was 380,000. So if you add 500,000, you now have 830,000 people who are, stuck looking for a home. That's, going to be an issue for them. Second thing, I moved to Calgary in 1980. I paid $500 a month for a basement suite. That same suite today is probably going for $1,500.
Right.
And wages have not tripled since 1980, most people were making a pretty good living. Also, as far as, needing more people, in Calgary in 1980, we had 620,000 people. Life was good. Calgary was the place to be in most people's opinion. That's why everybody came to Alberta, because of the oil.
Lots of people are moving to Alberta still.
Yeah. But,
right? And it's not just from other countries. It's from all across the country. right? Other parts of Canada. Yeah.
But we had 620,000 people, and life was great. We now have 1.6 million people, and life's not so great. Home prices are ridiculous. Rents are ridiculous. Food is ridiculous. Like our quality of life, I believe, has literally been cut in half as to what it was.
Okay.
And, I don't know who else to blame besides the government, because they're the ones that set the rules. And one other thing, quickly, if I may,
sure.
There are lots of incentives for first-time home buyers. But sadly, divorce is 50%. There's a lot of people, be it the man or the wife or the husband, who lost, their half of the house. Well, if their name was on the title originally, then they're not a first-time home buyer. Or it could have happened due to illness. There have been people who have lost their homes due to illness. Now they're better, sure. They're healthy. But,
I've taken calls like that, from older people in their, their late 30s, 40s, 50s, who say, look, I got divorced or whatever. I'm just starting over again. And these programs, whatever, they don't apply to me, even though it's just like starting brand new all over again, and can't take advantage of something like a first-time homebuyer program. That's a great point that you raised, Rob.
I think it should be for everybody. And also, the thing is, say if you have a son or daughter that's 25 and they move out of the house, they're going to be living somewhere, if they live to be 75 for 50 years. So why not have like a 40-year mortgage? That's going to bring the cost down per month for everyone. In 40 years, it could travel with you. You buy a house, you sell it, you still got that mortgage. That mortgage goes with you to the next house.
Yeah, well, I think about Maggie's call, though, is, whatever happened to the idea of, get yourself a modest house, and in 25 years, everybody gets together and you burn the mortgage. Like, just how long are people going to be in debt? We're already having amortizations of 30 years. And you're saying maybe 40 years?
But also,
and maybe you're passing on the mortgage to your kids?
Yeah, but they're talking about how many trillions of dollars is going to be handed down from parents to kids, right? It's a big
right. Big, okay, all right, interesting. Okay, thank you, Rob, for calling. Yeah, good to hear from you today. 1-833-668-2577. About 20 minutes left to take your calls. Full lines available. It's Talk Back on News Radio.
Something on your mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-68-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
I know a lot of people are raising housing affordability and high rents and the sky-high cost of single-family homes and condominiums, and I understand that, and I appreciate that. As we talk about poverty, I'm talking about poverty. I'm talking about people living in tents. I'm talking about people who are relying on food banks. We have millions of people going to food banks every month. And goodness only knows how many people are actually living in encampments across this country. I don't even know if there's an accurate estimate out there. The number of people living rough all across Canada. And winter's coming. I mean, it snowed in Calgary already. It snowed in parts of Nova Scotia yesterday. It was freezing in Ottawa this morning. What was it, David? -8, -9 in the nation's capital. I can't even imagine living outside. And we know that this is deadly. That the fire risk is so high as people try to keep warm in a tent. It's a pretty sad state of affairs, if you ask me. The National Post had a story on the front page of its website about homeless veterans. Remembrance Day is just around the corner. Veterans House Canada. So there's going to be an explosion of homeless veterans who served in Afghanistan. And I'm thinking, yes, I am thinking now about that veteran who asked Mr. Trudeau about services for veterans, and Mr. Trudeau said, "You're asking for too much." I don't think I'll ever forget that. The National Post says the estimated number of unhoused veterans across Canada ranges from 2,400 to more than 10,000. And that veterans are 2 to 3 times more likely to experience homelessness than the general population and are disproportionately represented among the unhoused. And one of the problems is you have two jurisdictions and they're probably not talking to each other. You have housing support, which is primarily under provincial jurisdiction, and then you have operational funding for veteran support programs, and that's under federal jurisdiction. But we have record usage of food banks. And why do we have so many communities struggling to deal with homelessness? Why can't we house our veterans? I mean, this is Canada. It's supposed to be a wealthy first world country, and yet so many people are lacking. I mean, these are very basic things. Food on the table, roof over the head. What can be done about this? What should be done about this? You have any ideas? Tim in Calgary. Thanks for calling, Tim.
Hey, how are
Tim.
you?
I'm okay, Tim. Thank you.
Nice. I just want to agree with the guys. They talk about the cut immigrants. I'm immigrant.
Yeah.
Myself, I'm immigrant with my family. But I agree with them to cut maybe 30, 40, 50% right now for 3-4 years just to see the situation because the inflation is crazy right now. This is the first thing. I want to talk about the second thing is about the house prices. For me, we have to find solutions for the international companies to stop them from buying here in Canada, buying houses and rent them for the Canadian people. The third thing about even the houses, the Canadian or permanent residents in Canada, we have to not allow them to find some law to not allow them to buy more than 3 or 4 houses in each province.
Okay.
We have to find this solution, this law.
Right. So you want a big cutback in immigration. So the announcement last week, cutting the number of permanent residency spaces by 24% over 3 years, that's not nearly enough in your opinion?
No.
And you think there should be crackdowns on international real estate investment in Canada?
Yeah, and it's not just about the immigrants. It's about the students, the international students. Last year, maybe 1 million students, international students.
Yeah, they're cutting that back too.
Yeah, we can't hold this number. The other thing, as I told you, we don't have to allow the people to buy more than 4 or 5 houses in each province because when they will take this money, they will invest them in another thing. Then you will create new opportunities for people to work. Okay? If you agree with me, I'm not sure.
Not entirely, no.
Okay.
Yeah.
The other thing, it's about the healthcare. We have a problem right now in Canada.
Oh yes.
We have at least 20,000 doctors doing Uber and skip the dishes and this job.
Right. Yeah.
International people.
Yeah.
And I don't understand why they. By myself, I'm talking about myself. Okay. I'm a doctor, and my wife is a doctor, and we are doing different things, survival things. We are here for 5 years. We cannot evaluate our credentials.
Well, yeah, I guess, the provincial medical associations want to make sure that your skills are comparable to Canadian skills, that there are no language barriers.
I know.
For example,
we have to find here a bridge program.
Right. Yeah.
The States they have, Germany they have, Australia they have. Why we don't have this system here in Canada?
Okay. All right. Yeah. Good
Lots
point.
Of people doing survival things. And if you don't have money for this thing, let the whole people, when you go to visit the clinic, pay 5% of your visit. Just 5%, which is $5 or $3.
Okay.
And we can invest this money to create or to find or to evaluate the other people.
Okay. Thank you for your call. We're over time now. I really appreciate your call, though, Tim. Giving it some thought there. Thank you. 1-833-668-2577 as we wind down Talkback on a Monday here on News Radio.
mind you want everyone to know?
Call now.
Hello.
1-833-668-2577.
It's Talk Back on Now You Know with Rob Snow.
All right, let's get right to the phones because we're tight on time here today. We'll go to Chris in Calgary. Hi, Chris.
Hey, Rob. Just a quick thought for you. I've missed parts of the program this morning, so I apologize if it's already been covered. But all of these challenges that are being discussed, the economic challenges, financial challenges, are coming at a time when supposedly the economy is reasonably healthy. If this turns a corner to a recession, things are going to get a lot worse.
Well, if I could just add one more thing to that, it is certainly not lost on me as the hours go by here. Let's also keep in mind what's been happening with government, especially the federal government. The size of the federal public service has grown by 43% in the last 9 years.
Yeah.
The national debt is in excess of $1 trillion now. The annual deficit is going to be in excess of $40 billion. Government has done nothing but grow bigger in the last decade. And yet, we don't know how many people are sleeping in tents on any given night, and we have record usage of food banks.
And people still want the government, quote-unquote government, to pay for more subsidies and more help for the population, but they don't realize the administrative costs that get built in there, which means it ends up more expensive for everybody, and it comes out in our taxes. So it's just not the right approach.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I don't know. It seems to me, and maybe we can close on this. We're just spending more and more and more, and yet the ranks of the poor seem to be swelling, and it leads me to wonder, where is all the money going? I remember when the PBO did an investigation on what it would take to do a basic income program. He pointed out many years ago that just at the federal level of government, there were 75 federal programs, just federal government programs designed to lift Canadians out of poverty. Programs that cost taxpayers $57 billion a year. And that was a report that came out years ago, going back at least 6 or 7 years. Probably even more programs now, costing even more money. And yet still so many people so close to the edge, barely getting by, living in a tent in the winter or relying on a food bank. I'm Rob Snow. Thank you to everyone who called today. Back tomorrow with more topics and more calls on Talkback.